an entertainment reporting format in such a great way.
Well, now,
that was just a taste of the beginning.
Sorry, Bill. I don't mean to interrupt you going on, but I'm going to go oot and a boot. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to say as many Canadian phrases as possible, but I believe we have man of the hour ready to go.
Ladies and gentlemen, everything I just said in the intro, and also his memoir is available now wherever wonderful books are sold. And we just did, there he is. God, every time, how many times do I have to tell you how jealous I am of the facial hair?
Yeah.
I just can't.
Impressive.
I can't grow sideburns. Oh, yeah. It looks like I super glue pubic hair on my face for the little bit of Homer Simpson I can grow. It just drives me nuts. But it is called A Little Bit Broken. It is unbelievable. And by the way, I got to tell you, Outside Observer, it's a lot broken. Half of my notes are examples of how you've deliberately or not deliberately hurt yourself. But there's also a lot of uplifting stuff in it, too. And including, again, as we were touching on, perhaps the most elaborate and interesting proposal in the history of proposals. Every other guy hates you right now. Including, I'm sure, Douglas, once you tell him about it.
Nah, that would be too much effort. Too much effort for my fiance.
It starts off where he directs she gets the first copy. We read a little bit of a clip of when she was actually doing it in the video of her getting the first copy. And it basically you tell her to turn to a certain page. And then there it is. She reads it before everyone else, and there's the proposal. That is well done, my friend.
I would like to know, on a percentage ranking, how confident you were that she would say yes. I'm assuming pretty confident.
100. Like, there is no way that I would have, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is because the question I got about that, because when I wrote the book, when I sat down to write the book, I knew it was going to end with the proposal. And then the first thing when I sat down to write the book was the first line that I wrote was the line in the proposal that reads, when you pick the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, you're also choosing the person who's going to tell your stories when you're gone. So you might as well choose somebody who only sees the best in you. And so that was the first thing that I wrote, and then I wrote that and I left it there, and then I went back and I wrote the whole book. But when I sold the book to the publisher, I sold it without the proposal, so they didn't know that it was going to end this way. And I went all the way up until the day that I submitted the very final manuscript. And when I submitted the very final manuscript, I slipped in the proposal chapter. So it was a surprise to even them. But the question I get was like, how did you keep this a secret from Catherine, my girlfriend? But because we never talk about marriage. It was like I was never going to be the one who sort of ruined it. It was going to be ruined because she would have overheard a phone call with me and one of the editors or somebody that I was working on the video with or something like that. So all of that stuff was the difficult part, but actually keeping it from her was easy because in the 2 years that I was writing the book, we didn't have one conversation about getting married.
It is fascinating. And you and Joanne is now recently engaged, although now soon to be married.
I'm getting married in less than 3 weeks, so yeah.
It's still mind-blowing to me. But in that same way, she and her fiancé were together for 7 years?
Yeah, before he proposed.
Right, and they were, for so long, you guys were just sort of meh on the whole idea of...
Yeah, we're both performers, so we live sort of non-traditional lives already, our lifestyle. No.
Huge swingers.
White picket fence is not really our vibe, but it was really the pandemic. It was being holed up with each other for 24 hours a day and really enjoying it and being there for each other that made us realize, but marriage could be really great. And also my health insurance price was going up. And he has that good SAG health insurance. So
if you were Canadian, you'd still be single.
Right? That's funny.
Please. But the interesting, it's just because most people, the only thing that we really heard about during the pandemic, maybe because of the interesting stories to tell, is that how many people who had been together for 12 years that split up because they realized that they couldn't actually spend time with one another, and that it was all those other distractions in life that was actually keeping them together. So it's an interesting, I'm happy for you that you're the example that came out of COVID being like, wow, why don't we get married? Because for me, like, I like weddings and I have no problem with it. I was married before, but I just don't like people in my business. And I always had a hard time when it comes to marriage, that I have to go down to City Hall and I have to walk into the same office for a permission slip to get married that I do if I want to install a toilet in my garage. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like permission. I don't like permission. I don't like to have, and then when you, and then God forbid you fall out of love in marriage, you have to go and ask permission. And then they say, okay, well, you need to file these paperwork and you can't actually get divorced for a year because now you're on probation from the city. And I'm like, I just never wanted any of that in my life. But then much like you at the pandemic, we had the kid and my kid's now 12. And, you know, we had always said that when she was born, if we ever did get married, we were going to wait until she was at an age of where she could enjoy it.
Yeah,
you know, where she could like really be a part of it. And she's, you know, going to be Catherine's maid of honor and all of this stuff. So, you know, so we're looking forward to it.
And I think it's also a great example of love for your daughter. It's this idea of, we didn't do it out of obligation or responsibility or feeling like we needed to for you. This is to show you that you do it because you want to do it and you want to celebrate your love, and it's on your own timeline. So I think that that's really special.
Well,
yeah, and in the video, if you watch the part of the video where, because I'm not big on the, again, asking permission, and so I never had any intention of asking, like going to Catherine's father or anything like that. But I asked Roxy's permission in the video if she would be okay if I asked her mom to marry me, because that was really sweet. That to me was important. But no, the idea of, you know, permission, and fine, guys do that, but for me, I think, especially like as somebody now who has a daughter, I think it's a real terrible place to set a woman up to start another part of her life, which is one grown man going to another grown man asking permission for something a woman needs to do.
Yeah.
I think it's gross. Like I'm like, fine. I know people. Most of my friends did the whole, I'm going to ask the dad permission, but I personally think that it's a terrible way to start another chapter of a woman's life with two men negotiating permission. I think it's weird.
Oh my God, he's absolutely right. I never even really thought about it, but also when you think about it, and I have no backup on this, just guessing here, but I'm assuming that that's a tradition that goes back to when women were more looked at as property.
Well, yeah, there were
and
dowries.
People were just getting married, like as an exchange, like it's a business exchange essentially between two families. That's got to be where the tradition goes back to.
Yeah. Well, you know, and my fiance actually asked. I'm the closest to my older sister, and I know you're very close to your older brother as well. So he smartly asked my sister first.
Perfect.
That's funny.
Perfect.
Yeah, and then
Perfect.
then I think out of tradition and out of respect just for my father, although my father does not care, went to him, and my father does what he did to my sister's husband, which was, what do you think she'll say when you ask her?
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, just like really jibbing him. So, but yeah, I think that with every family it's different, and
it is.
If your partner knows you, they know whether to ask, who to ask, whatnot, to make it all, you know, nice.
Well, we don't want to make this whole thing wedding planning, but I will say this. I was telling Joe that I was listening to an interview. I think it was a Roz and Mocha show like about 2 weeks ago, but you were talking about something that I thought was brilliant about not doing the table thing at the wedding, having like a food truck or something like that, but just I don't know, maybe a buffet type thing, but making it more just a party rather than assigned seat, all that crap. I don't know why more people don't do that.
Yeah, we're not going. We've decided on to not do traditional. Basically, it's going to be you know, a room that everybody is sort of familiar with. It's a place that we love a whole lot. And the idea is to just go and treat this place like you would have 1,000 times on any other Friday or Saturday night. But at some point during everything, there's going to be a wedding. And then it's just going to go back to being and looking and feeling like a bar, only with kids running around and multi-generations. And that's really, because I think that that's what people want. They want to go and they want to hang out. And, you know, and I don't have a lot of friends, so I have to pad out my guest list. like I told a guy at work that he's going to get a +3 just so he has options.
Yes.
Right? Like I'm going to give him that. But no, low key. But weddings are another thing. Like I have no problem with weddings, and a friend of ours is going to do the ceremony, I think. And so it's going to be cool. But I'm not that much of a traditional guy. But I do truly love when people are traditional. I really respect that, but it's just not for me.
Well, and I've told Joe this, we have a significant age difference between the two of us. I sort of look at her as
no.
We're already starting off on a bad track. I look at her sort of like the illegitimate daughter I should have aborted. And that's kind of our age difference. But you and I are
not even. You would have been, what, 12?
I was very virile. But you and I are basically the same age. And I was telling Joe, I love a good wedding, but I am now at the age where I don't get announcements for weddings anymore. What I get are people telling me they're getting a divorce. It used to be a summer full of weddings, and now it's just divorce after divorce after divorce with the friends that I grew up with. So it's refreshing to hear someone of my age group that's actually going to be doing something positive rather than another announcement like that.
That's because Catherine's 10 years younger than I am.
There it is. There it is.
Right?
All right. Good.
Yeah, a lot of life. There's a lot of life. I've never felt younger.
Although you have a history of dating older women, particularly in your misspent youth. There were a lot of those. Do you think that was something about you specifically, or maybe it was just the height?
Yeah.
They thought you were older? Or?
What, you were 6 feet tall by age 13?
Yeah. I'll tell you, that was one of those things where, when you feel like you're missing things in life or you're dealing with something, whether it be a trauma, you fill your life with things that give you sort of frivolous, joy and frivolous pleasure. And once you realize that stuff works, you sort of try and carry that, for as long as you can. And I used a lot of different things in my life to sort of make up for the things that I just was flat out refusing to address, like any, most young men, would, never ask for help and, try and repair yourself without anybody knowing that you're in any way damaged. And one of the things is I, lived in a small town my whole life. And then when I got to the city, you just had these incredible options. And I spent a lot of time in, back seats of cars and in hotel rooms with women who were my mom's age. And I, filled my soul with, those relationships. And I thought that's, all I needed, until you realize that there's a whole lot more than that. But that's, I did that for a very long time because it worked. Really, that's the honest,
and I think
the honest truth is that
when
it worked.
The guy's young, the older ones could teach you a little something there too. I'm not against it. I wish I had more opportunities like that, but no, I'm certainly not against the.
I think what I think that it's a common male thing to say. Hey, it's not so bad when the female teacher, I would love if my teacher had a relationship with me in school, until you're the kid that does, and then you're traumatized because it's not supposed to be that sort of dynamic.
I don't recall that Van Halen lyric. I recall it being all positive as far as those type of.
And that's exactly how I grew up too, right? Like that's exactly how I grew up. And because the one thing that that you, especially you and I, with the sort of age that we are, the age that we are now, which is now in 2022, and I have a daughter, and Joe, I'm sure that you'll be more in tune with this, is that we understand the damage that happens now when you sexualize young girls, right? For years we didn't, and we all let it happen, and it was great. We get now just how dangerous and damaging that is, but even now we don't talk about the damage that you can do to sexualizing young men. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of like what I went through when I was younger. Like I was 12 and I would have friends, aunts and, way older sisters be like, come back when you're 18. And I'm like, I'm 12. But back then, the one thing you couldn't do was talk back to a grown-up. Right? You couldn't stand up for yourself. You weren't allowed to stand up for yourself. And so there was years of, sort of all of that, where that's where you get your self-worth from. And in a lot of ways, what you hear about, young women, I think does happen to young men. It's just, God, like young men just won't talk about this kind of thing for a million different reasons. And I'm not here to try and normalize all of it. I'm just saying that it does happen, and it is as equally damaging, because it really damaged me for a very long time.
I agree. I think we're also of the first generation where all of my guy friends, an inordinate amount of them have daughters. And to a T, all of them would just prefer to continue just having daughters. And before that, a father always wanted a son for A, B, and C. That's really gone away of the dodo. But also, they like the fact that the daughter is pretty adoring of them, where sometimes there can be a more complicated relationship between the mom and the daughter. But also, everything you just said, all of that father-son stuff, they don't necessarily want to deal with. And there's an easier communication thing with a father and a daughter, at least that they find, that they don't have to put all that stuff on a son. I mean, you said it better, but I think there's a lot of that.
There is, and there's still stuff that goes on. It's like, you know, women, the one complaint that you know, a lot of women have is that, you know, sort of men don't talk about their feelings. And that they don't open up, and that they don't know how to articulate certain things. And you brought up when I was at ET Canada for all those years. I had rules on that show. And a lot of times people just thought that they were dumb rules, but I had rules. And the one rule that I had was if I was in front of a teleprompter, if I was ever handed a script and I'm doing a story about, you know, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon or Brad Pitt and George Clooney, the one word I would never use was bromance. Right? Yes. You hear bromance all the time. And People Magazine will write bromance. And I'm like, this is why young men don't talk about feelings and emotions, because the first time they find somebody who they're close with and they build that bond, you sexualize it. Right? You make it, you put a romantic spin on male friendship. And that's why men don't, and it happens all the time. Yeah. And yet the complaint is, why don't you open up? Why don't you talk about feelings? Why don't you do all this stuff? And you're like, well, because anytime I establish those relationships, you sexualize it. And that sort of makes me uncomfortable.
I remember you were talking about, shockingly, Joe's really into this little dog and pony show called The Bachelor. And you were saying, or The Bachelorette, that the women that are finding out that the guys were in therapy, that was like the biggest panty dropper in the show.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these days, I do think that we have come really far, especially with men and talking about their feelings and kind of taking ownership with that and going to therapy and being honest about it. And on The Bachelorette this past season, anytime there was a one-on-one date and the guy would say, I'm in therapy, would talk about his past, and then say he's working on himself. These women went nuts for it. Nuts for it, which makes sense. They're like, I'm not going to have to be this guy's therapist. You know, he's doing the work himself. And so now I know he's mature enough to do that, to take care of himself, and he won't judge me for doing the same. So
I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense though, like that, and also because, you know, there's suddenly you can look at somebody as something other than a project, because especially on those shows, you know, they're all fixer-uppers for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, or underdeveloped, you know, good-looking people who haven't really had to stand in line for anything in their life or face any sort of adversity. So yeah, when you say that you're in therapy, it means it's one less decision that they're going to have to make for you.
Yep.
Well, the memoir itself, it's written, and this is a very difficult thing to do, actually. It's very conversational, which makes it a breeze to get through pretty quickly. And that's a lot of people try and think that they do that, and they can't do it at all. And as a result, you will mention a lot of stuff that I'll be like, I just read something very similar that actually happened to Roz. And you'll just be like an anecdote you were talking about. One of them being, and I didn't even mention it, this was like last week, you talked about how you knew how to, I don't know, reinflate a lung or get liquid out of a lung because you were watching a show of Grey's Anatomy and you fancy yourself an MD. I'm like, actually, and in the back of my head, I'm like, Roz almost died with that almost exact same procedure.
Oh, wow.
I have a question. This is one of the many, many physically broken things that has happened to this man. But I want to touch on that a little bit, because you're the first person I've ever met that's actually gone through something like that while you were interning with Howard Stern, I believe. And secondly, you kept smoking. That was the part that blew, and I'm very embarrassed to admit I'm unfortunately still a smoker, but I never had that happen to me. So as far as that actual procedure is concerned.
Was it a collapsed lungs, or what happened?
I can't even pronounce what it was.
It's called spontaneous pneumothorax, and yes, Grey's Anatomy. You'll hear pneumothorax all the time. It's one of the things where you put a tube in. As many medical procedures as we know, you put a tube in it. Tubes fix everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I felt like I just felt this thing in my chest where I was in my early 20s and I was walking to work and it was super early in the morning and I realized like I had just been partying so hard. Like I was sleeping 3 hours a night and I'd been on this sort of bender of work and partying for weeks. And I was outside and I sat down on the curb and I couldn't breathe and I was panicking. And so the thing that I did, which is what I always did, lit a cigarette and to try and calm myself down. And I wound up going to work and I produced 2 shows that day. And then over my lunch, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go to the ER and see if they can fix me up. And then I'll be back for the afternoon. And I went in and I just said, I can't breathe. And then they chest x-rayed me, realized that one of my lungs had collapsed. My right lung had collapsed. And they put me on a gurney and they cut a hole in me and then they just started feeding tube into you and then it reinflates and everything just sort of drains out into this bucket on the bottom of the gurney. And normally it will re-stick itself to your chest cavity and they don't have to do surgery, but mine wasn't and it wasn't re-sticking. So they had to operate. And then the thing that they kept telling me was, it's your right lung. Don't worry. Right lungs are fine because if it's your left lung, it'll push on your heart, and that's where things can get really dicey. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went in for my surgery on my right lung, and while I was in the recovery room, still waking up from anesthetic, my left lung went completely.
What the?
Yeah. And then so the same thing, operation, and then I wound up getting all sorts of infections and everything else. And so I was in the hospital for fall that year. It was very beginning of September to very late November when I eventually got out.
So you never produced that afternoon show?
No, I didn't. I came out, it was snowing. Wow. When I got out, and I went in a t-shirt, and then what happened was that back in the 90s when it came to pills and opioids, the line that doctors would give you was that there's no chance you could become addicted as long as you're still in pain. Right? That the pills will only go towards the pain and they won't damage anything else. And then when they released me from the hospital, I was still dealing with an infection. I was in a lot of pain. And they sent me home with a bottle of Percocet that was the size of a beer can. And I had hundreds of them. And I figured out a system where I would take the pills when I felt great. And then when I was in a lot of pain, I would fight through the pain naturally. And so I was just in this constant fog for months. And I didn't know what it was. And I didn't think that the pills were a bad thing. And then when the pills ran out, I thought that I was dealing with another infection because I got really, really, really sick. And I wound up taking 2 weeks off work and then another week and a half. And I was going to the doctors and I'm like, guys, I think there's an infection. And they were doing all sorts of blood tests. And what I didn't realize is that I was kicking opioid addiction in my room alone.
Oh my God.
And it's such a good thing that I didn't know what it was, because if I did know what it was, I would have went to find something that was a substitute for the pills, where I just thought I was sick.
Oh my God! Now, and I've never been a big pill guy. I kindly gave my Percocets away when I broke my hand or stuff like that. You know, mostly because I don't like being constipated. But it's one of the dangers, and the reason that we have this opioid crisis that we do, is one of the dangers is that you can kind of fake it. Like you are sort of in this sort of pillowy high, but you can like actually work. You can get through the day without people being aware, and I'm asking because I don't know.
You can, especially when people know that you've just been in the hospital. Like they tend to give you a lot of rope. Like nothing is ever alarming. You know so I'm 6'4", and when I finally went back to work after all of this, I was 145 pounds.
Oh my God. That's basic. Oh,
and nobody said anything. One, because I looked fine, but two, they just assumed that it was everything else I was dealing with. Nobody had thought that. Nobody in the mid '90s would have thought that it was from any sort of addiction or narcotics.
I would have absolutely thought that.
If you were a woman, many people would have been commenting on your weight.
Yes.
Many people would have made comments.
In a positive way, too.
Probably.
And a very bad message.
Look great. What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, oh, God. And and so And again, like you go back to smoking, and if there is one upside to good old Philip Morris, it has given you a lovely bass to your voice. I will say that.
Nice.
But I just can't even. I mean, how are you even able to have a cigarette? So, well, first of all, you're so out of it in almost like a coma-like state in this hospital for so long. You've naturally quit.
Yeah.
But you just go back to the smoking after, which I guess is stress, all that kind of stuff. But it just back into it, huh?
No, it was worse than that because I knew that cigarettes are bad and I knew I didn't want to smoke cigarettes again. So when I got out of the hospital, I started smoking cigarellos.
Oh my
like
God.
mini cigars,
Clint
but only
Eastwood
I wasn't smoking them correctly because I was fully inhaling them like you do a cigarette. And so I went back to that and then realized that hurt too much. And then I just went and bought a pack of cigarettes. And then that was that.
Between the scar tissue in your lungs and the tobacco, like, would you get winded walking a block? I don't know how your body was able to handle all of this.
Yeah. I really, it's interesting because when you're sick for that long, you just get really used to feeling like garbage always.
Yeah.
So it's not even, so it would never even occur to me that I was anything other than normal because it's just, that's what normal felt like. Like normal just felt awful and normal felt awful all the time.
Oh, God.
Well, and I imagine as someone who really has never done a drug besides wine.
You experimented with edibles.
I've had an edible, and I'm like, I don't feel a thing. I'm so funny.
Yeah.
But I imagine that it's exactly what you said, especially when you're doing these harder drugs. It's this idea of, oh, I didn't realize I could feel like this.
Right.
Like, I thought I was doing okay. I thought I was living a pain-free life, or I was, feeling happy. But now, oh, this is great, and I want this all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing where if I don't try it, I don't know what I'm missing.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I don't do any drugs. Like I've smoked weed 3 times in my life, and I vomit terribly from it. I've never done coke. I've never been interested in that stuff, mainly because I'm not afraid that it's going to hurt. I'm afraid that I'm going to like it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that that's where it comes from. I don't have a curiosity about what something feels like. I have a curiosity about how good something feels.
Mm-hmm.
That is a weird dichotomy with you because your pain way before the lung thing, you had already had a pretty epic pain tolerance.
Yes.
And I remember when I was reading interviews with you, and they would touch on self-harm, and I thought it was sort of a cutting thing. I've never had any real experience with burning. But by the way, you don't do things halfway, my friend. And the burning, it would be to the point where you would have excuses for the scars. At one point, I believe, and this is so different to what I would, because if I had herpes, I would say I was burning myself, and you did the opposite, where people would see stuff that was sort of near your crotch or something, and you would say, "Oh, it's like an STD," rather than in reality, you were burning yourself.
Right. Yeah, I was, because it was less sort of shameful, I guess, for me to say that that I had an STD than it was for me to say that I was hurting myself. Because I couldn't explain the hurting myself. I didn't know why I did it, because I think that and it's when you're young and male, especially at that time, there's 2 things that people can say to you and both hurt like hell. One is somebody can look at you and tell you that you're fucked up. That hurts.
Yeah.
What hurts even more is that when you feel fucked up and somebody looks at you and they tell you that you're normal. Because when somebody tells you that you're normal, you lose hope. Then you don't want to ask for help ever again. And when I say normal, I mean when somebody says many people go through this, because I thought I was alone. And I didn't know if what I was doing was completely normal, but I would, in those moments need to feel normal, and I would feel normal when I hurt myself. And I had no explanation for it, much like other people who self-harm. There was no explanation for why that worked. And I didn't know, and I didn't ask any questions, and I had nobody to talk to. But all I knew is that in those moments, I would feel as close to normal as what I thought normal felt like. And so I didn't stop.
There's a controlling aspect to it. It's a cliche because it's true. There's, I think, that whole, I can't feel anything, but I can feel this aspect as well. And I'm a little foggy on it, but I recall you kind of ended up stopping when you were with this crazy girl you were hanging out with, and they're my favorite kind. And I think she was sort of basically trying to see how much you could take, and you basically really burned. I think it was your hand or the side of your arm or something like that. Something that really lasted, and that was sort of it.
Here.
Right. Oh my God!
I have two scars. I don't know if you can see them on here, but I have one that's right there. And these are 25 years old, right? But I have one that's right there.
Oh.
But yeah, we were. You just have these. You find that person who walks into your life when you don't need to find somebody exactly like you. And I was at a real dark place, and I just needed a partner to sort of race to the bottom with. And that's who this person was for me. And, they feel glorious when you meet them, but they're also very, very wrong for you. And we were having just one of these heady conversations in a bar about feelings and what do you feel and what don't you feel. And she grabbed my hand and put a cigarette out in my hand, and I didn't flinch because I just burned myself so many times that the feeling of burning myself I don't even notice it anymore. Even today, if I hit my hand on the side of a pan, it'll be a day later, and Catherine will be like, "What the hell did you do to your hand?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I don't even know." And then I said nothing the first time she burned it, and then she took my cigarette out and put my other hand on the table, and went to do it again, and I put my hand on top of her hand and just pushed it all the way.
God.
And it was in that moment, and that was the last time I burned myself. And I think that it was because the feeling that it was public. It was now something that wasn't just mine.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
I realized in that moment that I didn't need that anymore to feel. I always thought I did, but I didn't, because I felt worse in that moment after that happened. And that was the last time. I never relapsed. I never went back to it. Never wanted to go back to it. But that was something I did probably from 1991 until about 2003. Consistently.
But did you find then that after that, maybe you weren't burning yourself anymore, but did that then carry over into something else, some other form of control or secret behavior? Do you think it just sort of funneled its way into something else?
Yeah, it did. And I funneled a lot of stuff into how much I could take when it came to work. Right. And I would let people, hurt me in other ways and allow it to happen, because, I had always thought that or at least my sort of self-worth and what made me unique was how much I could handle. I was always like, I can handle more than anyone. And then I realized that it's not how much I can handle, it's what I can offer. And as soon as I realized that it's what I can offer, was sort of a switch flicked in my brain. And I just recalibrated how I treated people and how I treated myself. And that was the sort of beginning of me kind of getting out of the hole.
Well, up until very recently, you have been doing 2 full-time jobs, and then now have just recently left ET Canada. Have you, even though that would still, for any normal person, be not much free time, period, for you, I feel like that's probably a lot of free time compared to what you're used to. Are you able to deal with that all right?
He's the Ryan Seacrest of Canada.
I think you did mention recently that you've been approached to come back to TV again.
Yeah, and it's too soon. Right now, because I'm just still doing so much work for the book, so I don't know what it's like to only have one job. Yeah. But it's interesting. It's interesting, Joe, what you just touched on. There is a part of me that is fearful of having time on my hands.
Oh, I'm sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I've filled a lot of life with work and not just work. I actually really grew to love the people that I worked with. I've worked with some really wonderful, talented people, but having time on my hands is the one thing that I have never had. I don't know what I'm going to be like.
I don't want to put it into genders, but I do feel like there's that, we've talked about it before, that weird guy energy.
Yeah.
They focus it only on sex or only on chemicals or something like that. I think the most unhealthy time of my life was that last little brief part of the 2000s where one could actually make money freelancing. And I had a couple of regular gigs at a couple magazines, and I was making okay money. But I had a lot of time on my hands as a result.
Yeah.
And those were the two most unhealthy years of my entire life. Like, I just had a little apartment in Harlem, and I was repulsive.
Well, y'all just need a hobby. And I have a suggestion for you. You do touch on this in your book a bit. You said it isn't a self-help or a how-to book, but you did talk about cooking a really nice Thanksgiving turkey or bits of turkey. Yes. You do talk about spatchcocking a bird, which is my fiance cooks, and he has been doing that to chickens and turkeys for years.
And you are not a cook, and I was surprised that you were so taken by. Are you using his recipe to try to turn yourself into a cook?
No. I'm going to tell my fiance, well, now you got to try the boiling water trick to really get the skin nice and crispy. Also, the saving of the skin at your butcher, that's so smart. But I mean, these days now too, with social media, TikTok, you could like really dive into cooking a little more and like sharing your knowledge just like on these different platforms. But I guess only if it's fun. I'm trying to do it, and it's not feeling very authentic to me. So that's what's stopping me.
Joe always says her love language is acts of service. I'm like, no, you just like people doing shit for you. Love has nothing to do with it. She's just a little lady baby that's lazy and wants everyone to do that, and then she calls it a love language. So
it's just an act of it's things I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Like taking out the trash and cooking.
No, you're just a princess. There's no love language there.
there cannot that no list only has two things. You said taking out the trash and cooking. What's the third?
The third, making the bed.
Yeah,
I'm an awful housewife.
No. By the way, the third is everything else. I'm surprised she dresses herself, frankly.
Right.
Well, changing tires. Like that, don't you?
Oh, yeah. That's when I first gave it up in college.
Mm-hmm. A guy changed a tire for her.
Not just a guy. It was my
boyfriend. Yeah.
A guy.
Actually, it was a AAA guy. I don't think I ever get the name.
That was his tip.
But, yeah, she liked the cook. Well, you were on you did do a cooking show, right?
I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah. You know, Chopped. They did a celebrity version of Chopped in Canada, and I was on there with one of the guys from Bare Naked Ladies and a couple other singers, and that show haunted me.
Oh,
because I came second.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know that type of like experience was going to be like traumatic for me.
Really?
Yeah, because I took
hilarious.
it very seriously. And I got down to the final two, and I remember they do these interviews with you where you talk to the camera. And I had said at one point, listen, I will lose to anything. I just don't want to lose to somebody who takes all the ingredients from the chop box, throws it in one pot, and calls it a jambalaya. Right? I don't want to lose to that. To me, that's lazy. And then Stephen Page from Bare Naked Ladies, that's exactly what he did, and he won. And it drove me nuts. And then there was like 6 months between when we taped Chopped to when it aired, and I would wake Catherine up in the middle of the night. I would be lying down, and I would be replaying the entree over and over and over and over in my head about everything that I did wrong. And I was just like, it really affected me. And it was a charity show.
Yeah.
It killed me.
You know how actors are really good, like at the Oscars and stuff, of acting like they're happy for the other guy that won when all their faces are on the screen?
Yeah.
When you, did they do a close-up of you when you came in second, and you're just sitting there, there's fucking steam coming out of your ears? Is there a shot of that?
I was pissed because the other thing that I didn't know about those shows, right? Because I learned so much on set that day, which is I never realized it, when you see all the chefs in the kitchen, and then they put it all on the plate and they plate it up, everything else. When they are giving it to the judges, if you notice, the kitchen behind them is now suddenly spotlessly clean, right? So what happens is that we finished cooking these entrees, put them aside. They took 2 hours to clean the kitchens behind us, then brought the entrees out and gave them to the judges. And the one thing they don't tell you on TV is the one thing that they're not allowed to judge when it comes to your meal is the temperature. So everything they eat is cold.
I don't. That makes.
But like even
there's so many
but like
around that.
some things lose their texture. Like if something is crispy, it could be less crisp if it's been steaming by other hot foods. That is, I don't like that.
Everything.
That makes me angry.
Yes.
This is the most emotion I've ever seen.
You know, like a soggy French fry. Who wants that?
Oh my God! Wait till you find out. I had worked with a producer who worked on House Hunters. That show. So House Hunters,
There's
the thing that I
didn't
thing that I didn't realize about that show was you can always tell what house they're going to choose on House Hunters because it's the house that they go into that has no furniture. Because the couples on House Hunters are only on House Hunters because they have already purchased that house. And the other two houses are just houses that people either know or that are already for sale. That's why you see on House Hunters, they'll walk into one place that's empty, which is clearly the house that they bought, and the couple will be like, oh my God, I love this. And then they walk into the most beautiful place you've ever seen, and they go, yeah, you know, the place is great, but that towel rack in the bathroom is a deal breaker. And you're like, rip out the towel rack. Because they're never going to buy that house. They've already purchased the house. The only way you get on that show is if you've already just bought a house.
Yeah.
And now I can't watch that show anymore.
Oh, my God, that takes me right out of it. I don't even want to tell Jonathan that because he's a big fan. My brother's a real estate agent. And again, everything's been coming up, Roz, lately because there's just stuff in the news where I'm like, that reminds me of something that you've said or something that was in the book. Two recent examples. I had a hard time getting through this. I think I told you about it. But I also couldn't look away. It's on the level of Jeffrey Epstein, and I am talking about The Secrets of the Playboy Mansion, which I believe is on, it's like 10, 15 episodes. I believe it's on Hulu, I think.
Yeah.
And I was watching it because I was reminded of when I've never been to the Playboy Mansion. I guess no one can really go anymore. But you have, and you touched on it a little bit. I'd always heard that not only is it not exactly what you would think it would be, there's sort of an overwhelming aroma of cat piss to a certain extent. Everything's a little bit ratty. When you actually go in there. And I remember you talking about, and this reminded me because you guys are talking about food, how disappointed you were and whatever 5-star chef gave you this horrific taco. And you were all excited for this because, you know, Hugh Hefner is going to have the best chef ever.
It's hyped up. Sometimes the hype really lets you down.
Well, and I forget what the specifics of it was.
This picture is literally, my wife just found this. That's the picture of me and Hef.
Oh, my God. That's amazing. Right? And look, he's in the robe, the whole deal.
Yeah,
of course. Santa Claus is real.
Because what you realize is that it's all brand, right? Like it's all of that stuff is brand. And the thing with Hef and that house is that when there's no curated party planners and everything else, it is a sad old house full of sad old men.
Yes.
And you realize that the second you walk in there, that it is a sad old house of sad old men. And when we were there, the guy who sort of worked for Playboy in publicity, we were talking of like, what happens to this place when Hef goes? Because those conversations had been going on for a long time. And at the time, in the late 90s, you started to sort of get the sense that maybe the historical society would come in and they would do something with the Playboy Mansion, whatever it was. And this guy looked at me and he said, that day that Hugh Hefner dies, his daughter is on a plane from Chicago to put a for sale sign in the front yard. Because the Playboy Mansion, the thing is that the Playboy Mansion was losing Playboy so much money that it was an albatross that they no longer needed. And not only that, but it was damaging to the Playboy brand because they didn't like the parties and they didn't like any of that stuff and they didn't want Hef. But Hef was sort of, you know, he was the guy. And in the 90s, when all those stories were coming out, like Hef is back when he was newly divorced and, you know, the E shows were starting, everything else, the idea of pushing Hef aside would have seemed very ageist at the time.
Sure.
Right? Like
okay,
it would have been elder abuse, because he was this now sort of revered guy again, that people looked at him as this, sort of free speech, sexual revolution, what a champion of all these things. And then all these years later, the opinions of him, rightfully changed. But it was a show when you were there. And yeah, the house smelled, and it was just old dudes shuffling around. And every now and then you would see some young blonde, in a tracksuit getting in and out of a convertible and running up the stairs to whatever room they were staying in without talking to anyone. There was no fun. There was no life in that house.
You encapsulated it perfectly, and it was compounded in this thing. And I'll tell you what, there's a reason why so many of Bill Cosby's anecdotes take place at the Playboy Mansion. Not only that, they almost allude to the fact that if anything, Cosby learned the whole Quaalude deal from Hugh himself, who would use it a lot, those Quaaludes. Yeah, it was just jaw-dropping.
I imagine your young teenage self who would just sneak out and look at those nudie mags with your friends, just being utterly disappointed when you get to the Playboy Mansion. Gosh,
oh yeah.
The kid in me thought this would be so much cooler.
Oh, and to that end, by the way, I loved. You end on a great, and we haven't even really touched on your dad, but it's, I remember when you first mentioned your dad, I'm like, oh boy, is this going to be another one where the father and son hate each other, and it's going to be one of these dynamics? Could not be further from the truth. Your ex-Marine old man, and you have probably one of the better father-son relationships I'd seen, but certainly odd in some ways, particularly the grift that you do with your dad at the end of the book, and it's basically... It's basically fire,
insurance
smoke,
scam.
Smoke insurance. Yeah. If you want to touch on briefly, because I want to find out what happened to that porn.
Yes, no problem. I'll be happy to tell you what happened to the porn. It was really important for me because spoiler alert, my dad dies in the book. But it was important for me in the book that the last story I tell about my dad was not going to be the one where he dies. So I actually fought with editors and everything else where I'm like, I'm going to start kind of going back in time after he dies. And I end it on the last mention of my dad was my favorite story of my dad, which is my uncle, my mom's brother, was an insurance man. And he used to run this scam all the time, which was they got a call from a family, very wealthy family. And they had a kitchen fire. And my uncle, the insurance guy, had to go out and inspect the damage because they were claiming the whole house all contents in the house needed to be replaced. And so my uncle goes out there and he's looking at all the stuff and everything's fine. Everything is totally fine. There's nothing burned. It was a small kitchen fire. They put it out immediately, but the family was claiming smoke damage. They said everything smelled like smoke, so everything had to go. And so my uncle was like, okay, cool. And it's his job to get rid of everything and bring it all to the dump. But he got my dad, and he called my dad, and he's like, listen, grab Roz and his brother and rent a U-Haul and come out with me, and we're going to empty out this family's house because we have to bring everything to the dump. And so we went out, I was 12 years old, and we went out and we cleaned this family's entire house out and filled a large U-Haul and then drove it back to our place. And my dad and my uncle and me and my brother emptied everything out onto our front lawn. And my mom and my aunt went and just shopping. They just went and picked all the stuff that they wanted to get. It was like a giant rummage sale. Yeah. And the only thing we had, my brother and I, our biggest dream was that we had beta machines. We didn't have VHS machines, and they were too expensive, and my old man would never get us a VHS machine. But through this scam, we had multiple VHS machines now. So my brother grabbed the machines, and I grabbed the box of this family's home movies, and I brought them down to the basement, and we hooked it all up. And it was like so much porno. For a young kid finding that much porno, it's like you knew immediately that you were going to be legendary among your friends.
Oh my
because
God,
nobody
yes.
had access to this kind of porno before. And then I just remember my dad yelling down the top of the stairs, being like, "Hey, did you guys get everything you want?" And we were like, "Yeah, pops, we're good.
We're good."
And that was my favorite dad story and then I ended off by saying, listen, anybody can be a father, but what makes you a dad is taking your two young teenage son on an insurance scam for free VCRs and porno, right? That's what makes you a dad.
You described it perfectly, particularly at that age, at 12. Just all of this stuff in my head, I could just hear a choir If I were in that situation at that age, I would not know what to do with myself. I mean, it's almost too much extra sensory to deal with at that particular age.
I'm trying to imagine what would be the equivalency, like for me at my age, if I were to stumble upon old Broadway playbills. Stop it. With signed signatures?
Very sad but true. That's why that's a chapter I never want you to write in your memoir. No, because no one else is going to care about it.
I do want to talk a little bit about just the process of writing, and it's a memoir. You keep saying memoir.
Excuse me.
Memoir.
It's memoir.
I can't pronounce things good.
You know, you really do talk a lot about your childhood, your family. You are honest about stuff that you don't really remember much of, like the waterbed house.
Yes.
Like, I remember the waterbeds, but, you know, I don't remember family dinners there. But, like, is there a process, like, to remember these things and then write them all down? Like, I think that would be really difficult for me to... because you capture it in so much detail. So maybe what I want to know is how much is it stuff that you vividly remember and other stuff maybe your brother had to help you remember or...
Sure. I think that what you do is you start off by telling your sort of big stories. I think that we all have stories from our youth that we've just told over the years.
Yeah.
Right? We all have a collection of these stories that are polished, and you know where the punchlines are, and you know the tempo of them. And so that's the first thing I did, was I took all the stories that we've told our whole lives, and I wrote all those down first. Then I went back and I tried to put in the ones that I was having difficulty with either remembering or figuring out the details. But it's the thing I didn't do was I didn't ask my mom and I didn't ask my brother. My mom found out that I was writing this book right before it went to the printer.
Wow.
Right. My brother didn't know that I was writing this book. They had no idea. And because I didn't want... When you start telling people, and some people like that sort of collaborative work when it comes to writing about family. For me, I was worried that because I did have holes, that if I went looking for help, I would wind up writing somebody else's version of a story other than my own.
Fair.
And I didn't want to do that. I was like, even if I get some details wrong, it's still going to be my version of the story.
No, that's smart.
As opposed to somebody else's version of what I failed to sort of remember. And so I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't want to be influenced in any way. But it's different for all writers.
Gotcha.
Thank you so much. By the way, we usually just do half-an-hour interviews, but we wanted to get you on as soon as possible.
Quickly.
I know, and I have this many more questions.
I could talk to you for another 2 hours.
I want to ask really quickly, and I am angry at myself because I got all these notes, but if I'd done a modicum of research, I could have found out who this woman is myself. I wouldn't mention her name because I noticed that you distinctly did not. Have you heard, and I know this person, I mean, I don't know her specifically, but I've worked with people kind of like this, that sociopathic boss of yours early on that you describe very well, but you don't mention her name, and I'm sure that was a publisher's move. No. Have you heard from her?
I have not yet.
I have a feeling at some point, particularly the way she is, if she finds out about it, she's going to track you down.
Oh, I'm sure she knows. But I will say this: there are a lot of names in the book that I do change or just omit completely. And one of the reasons was, one, I don't think that revenge makes for a great memoir. Right? I don't think that I'm not big on that. But also the actual reason was because who I wrote about in the book was not the people they are now. I wrote about the people they were then. And these are people that, for the most part, I've had no contact with in 20 years. And my hope is that people can change. And I wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt that they aren't those people anymore. But I also wasn't going to omit the awfulness that they did at the time. So I hope people can change. That's why I didn't sort of drag anybody into this. But there's no way that I was not going to include the stories.
Well, it is unbelievable. It is a roller coaster, but there ain't a dull chapter in this bad boy. It is, if you please go out and get it now. And it's such a lovely cover. It's going to really stick out in the airport.
Oh yeah,
airport's
in the state where you guys are in the States. You can get it at Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. Order it online. That is the easiest and best way to get the book.
And you said you didn't want to do a self-help book, but there's a lot of stuff that does help in this as well. But man, I can't thank you enough. Please let us know if you're ever physically in NYC. We'd love to have you on in actually the studio again. And we could talk about
I would love to. I really would. I think you guys are just dynamite. I love the dynamic of both of you. It's really, really wonderful to see.
Oh, thanks, Roz.
Well, thanks so much, buddy. Congratulations on both the book and the upcoming nuptials. I hope you took notes.
Oh, sure did.
For both of your weddings. Well, thank you so much again, man. Loved it.
Right on. Yeah, no, I appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't even ask any Star Wars questions.
Oh, thank God.
Why? That wasn't. I'm so upset at myself because I heard you going off on Obi-Wan, and I'm like, God damn it! I just want to touch on Obi-Wan before we get off of, but that we'll do it next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, buddy.
Right on.